Hello students, hope all of you are okay. Now in our previous lecture we have gone through the two different files, that is dao.php and crudecontroller.php. Remember one thing, output of these two particular file is nothing onto the browser, it displays blank onto the screen, so don't worry about this. But if it shows any error, then try to resolve this particular error in your program. Now let's go ahead. Next, after designing this dao.php and crudecontroller.php, it's time to go for next file, that is called as index.php. In index.php, the first block that we have to include is include underscore once crudecontroller.php, which ultimately call this particular file in index.php module. Then I have written $crudecontroller equals to new crudecontroller. That means I have created an object for this particular index.php file. Then my third line is $result equals to $crudecontroller reference to read the data. Now the purpose of this particular line of code is to read the data which is stored inside the database table, and it throws this particular database records onto the screen in this format. So for that I have written this line of code. Then there is a static page designing by writing HTML and head, then a title that I have given, this is an demo. This title is going to be displayed over here. You can give any title for this particular program. Then some CSS setting I have mentioned over here. Whenever I share this particular program with all of you into the lab, just write down this line of code from that particular program. No need to remember this whole line of program, because it just call the CSS settings from your style sheet. Then into the body section I have written a one division file. In that division file I have given a one button which is called as add new record button. This particular line of code will display this button onto the screen, which contains a file name called add new record. In that, whenever you press that button, it executes the file called add.php, which we will discuss later on. First we will finish index.php, then we will go for add.php and other files. Then in next division class I have written a one dynamic line required underscore once list.php. Now the purpose of this list.php file is to fetch the record from the database table, and it will display in this section onto the screen. So this list.php actually list out all the details from database table, and it will display onto the screen. Now the students, you can see that all the informations are in this rectangle. Several rectangles are there with title, description, category, and these two buttons called edit and delete. So for that, the line of code that I have mentioned are over here. It is called as a one type of wrapper class. In that wrapper class, first I have written a section for FRM edit. This FRM edit will display this edit button. Same like that, in this FRM edit, whenever you click on this edit button, it displays this drop down with title, description, URL and category. So for that, the line of code that I have written over here is, this is for displaying title, this is for displaying description, this is for displaying URL, and lastly it will display category in this particular screen with two buttons, that is a button of close and the button of save changes. So that two buttons will be displayed by the class called model dash footer, and the button contains a close button. In the same class, another button is given over here, but the title of that button is save changes. So these two buttons will be displayed over here. And then there is a completion of relevant division class with model for message. What does it means, model for message? It means whenever you click on this edit button, on a same page it will give all the information in drop down which you can directly edit. So for that I have written this line of code. Now students, I know you get confused that by reading words like model fed, message model, example model label, something like form group, then model dash body, etc, etc. So actually all these are the class files which calls from the file called style.css. Whenever I hand over this particular model you into the lab, you will get a one file that is called as styles.css. In that style.css, all these class with their settings has been written. You need to just take a copy of all these class and their settings in your programs. No need to remember about this. In detail, many things I have written over here that you have to just keep in your reference by including the style.css file. CSS means, as we know, that it means cascading style sheet, in which once we return the line of code, effect of that particular line of code is going to be repeated in all the files for that particular HTML tag. So in my next lecture we'll go for the next file that is called as list.php. I just want to say that this list.php which we have mentioned in index.php will display the content onto the screen. So don't get confused. First write down dao.php, then CRUDcontroller.php, then write down the index.php. Will just display this rectangle with this button onto the screen, nothing else. This data is going to be displayed by the file which is called as list.php, which we will discuss in our next lecture. This is just a one overview of list.php. We will discuss in more detail in the next section. Thank you very much.